Hi, I'm Lauren Terry from brightsonwhite.com, and we're going to be making our first quilt from start to finish as part of my beginning sewing series. So let me talk about the things that you're going to need for this project. First off, with quilting you need a mat to cut on and a straight ruler that looks something like this, and then a rotary cutter. Also for this quilt you need 1.25 yards of some backing and batting. So you can buy this off of a bolt at a sewing store, and most of the fabric that you buy on a bolt is 40 inches or to 42 inches wide, and then you need to get 1.25 yards long. So sometimes I skip the batting if I have a backing that's like minky or something that's really fuzzy. So you could skip the batting that way if you just want to do a fuzzy backing. But for this quilt, I want it to be extra soft and cuddly, so I'm doing a batting and a fuzzy backing, a minky backing here. For the quilt top, you're going to need 2/3 yard of two fabrics that you choose. I chose this floral and this mint color, and I got 2/3 yard of both. And then this is 3/8 yard that we're going to use for the binding. So to get started, I'm going to cut my fabric for the quilt top. Here I have already pressed my fabric so that there aren't a lot of wrinkles in it, and that's an important step. And I used to think, oh, I don't really need to do that, that's not important, but it really helps your cutting be more accurate, and it helps your finished project just look more sharp and nice. So you'll want to make sure you press your fabric before you start cutting. And I'm going to go ahead and cut. This is 4 layers because I have 2 fabrics that are folded over. But if you're new to cutting, I would just cut 1 layer of fabric, or 1 piece of fabric at a time, folded over. All right, so to get started, I'm going to come to the edge over here and just cut a nice, clean, straight edge. So I line up the bottom of this ruler with the bottom of my fabric, and then I go all the way to the top and line up the top of this fabric so that I feel like it's nice and square. It's a nice perpendicular angle. Okay, now we're going to cut strips that are 5 inches long. So this ruler happens to be 5 inches long, but if you didn't have a ruler, if you had a ruler that was 6 inches long, then you would just make it so that 1 inch was hanging off the edge here. Alright, so now this time I'm going to line up on the bottom and the top, but I'm also going to make sure it's flush all the way on the edge right here. And then cut. When you're cutting, you don't want to push this way with your ruler, you just want, or with your rotary cutter, you just want to push straight down so that you're not going to move your ruler and make it a crooked cut. So again, I make sure everything's lined up. I'm going to push just straight down, not pushing over. All right, now continue until you have 4 strips of each fabric. So I'm going to cut 2 more strips. Okay, now we're going to cut the strips for our binding. Binding a quilt, we're not going to do that until the very end. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do the binding. I'm just going to show you how I like to do it, and also refer you to some great tutorials online of where I learned to do it. And binding I feel like for me was the thing that was the most kind of ominous when I was starting out. So if you do have someone around who has quilted before and can just kind of walk you through the binding and help you with it, then that's preferred. But otherwise, like I said, I'll put on some great tutorials that I have used and loved, as well as just showing you some of what I do here. But since we have to cut our fabric, we're just going to cut the strips right now. So go ahead and cut a clean edge for your binding fabric. Now we're going to cut 2.5 inch strips. So I'm going to move my ruler over so that I have 1 inch, 2 inch, and then a 1/2 inch underneath. I'm going to line up the bottom and this edge line, the 2.5 line, all the way to the top, and then cut. All right, there's 1 strip. You need at least 5. Maybe we could squeeze it out with 4, but since it's one of our first quilts, I'm just gonna have you cut 5. 2. 3. All right, so you can just put these strips aside and save them for when we get to the end of the quilt. Next, I want you to grab the strips that you cut for your quilt top. We're gonna get out our sewing machine and our pins. Okay, so take 2 of the strips that are, you should have 2 separate fabrics, and you're going to open them up so that they are, the right side is facing you. Sometimes with just solid fabrics like this, it's hard to tell which is the right side, but just do your best. If you can't tell when you're looking really hard at it, other people probably won't be able to tell, so that's okay. All right, and I want you to put whichever fabric is lighter on top. And then we're gonna sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way down the edge here. So if you're new to sewing, go ahead and put some pins down, just making sure that it's flush, that these 2 are just right next to each other. One isn't hanging up or off more than the other. For instance, you don't want to pin it like that. You want to pin it so that they're just right at the same spot. Okay. And then you're gonna sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way down. You might need to kind of practice with some practice fabric. That would be a good idea, just to make sure that you know where you need to line up the edge of your fabric to get that 1/4 inch seam. All seams in quilting, almost all, are a 1/4 inch big. So you have to make sure that you've got that down. So go ahead and do that with your first strip, and then repeat it with your other 3 sets of strips. All right, so now I've sewed each of my strips together, and I've got 4 pairs in total. Now what you need to do is press the seam allowance to the dark side. So whatever your fabric is like, probably one of them is darker than the other. If one of them isn't darker than the other, then just pick one fabric to press it to. But a good rule of thumb is that if one side is darker, then you press it to that side. So I'm just gonna take this and go all the way down the strip. I kind of like pull right here just gently to make sure that it's flat. And I'm gonna press that all the way down. And this is easier to do on an ironing board, but I'm just showing you here. Okay, you can even turn it over and press it from the front as well. But you're gonna do that with all 4 sets of your strips. All right, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of strips. Now what I'm gonna do is join these together again so that I only have two strips with 4 smaller ones. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so here's my 1 and 2. I'm gonna fold these so the right sides are together. I'm gonna pin it right here, and then I'm gonna sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way down that length. Then I'm gonna do the same thing with this one. So let's put it right sides together. So it's alternating your different fabrics. Then just do the same thing. Go ahead, grab some pins. You're gonna pin it all the way down and then sew it all the way down. Okay, and after you've sewn it, I want you to take this back to the ironing board and press this seam to the dark side as well. All right, so I'll meet you back here. All right, so now I have 2 big strips with these 4 smaller strips in each, and now we're gonna start subcutting them. So just to review real quick, double checking, make sure yours looks like mine. This seam is going towards the dark fabric. This seam allowance is going towards the dark fabric, and then this seam allowance is going towards the dark fabric. All right. So get it flat, and again you're going to cut a straight edge. You want to just barely cut off the selvage and not any more than that, because we should be able to get at least 8 cuts out of this strip. But if you cut off a bunch right at the beginning, then you might not be able to get your full 8. All right, so I'm going to cut this in 5-inch increments. So I'm going to line up everything here, and this is 5 inches wide. And I'm going to go ahead and give it a cut. Continue down until you have 8. Okay, so we got 8 of these units from our first strip, and then you'll get cut 8 more from your second strip. So you should have 16 total that look like this. All right, so next what we're going to do is you're going to take 2 and set them like this. Then, and also make sure that your dark fabric is on the left. You're going to flip this bottom one, and that makes it so it's more of a patched look. And then also you can see that now we're going to be able to nest our seams, which means that this seam allowance is going this way and this one's going this way. So when we fold these right sides together, you can wiggle the fabric around, lick your fingers if you have to, and put a pin in it. So now it's just like kind of locks into place right there. So go ahead and put a pin, because that's where you're gonna sew across. And if you put a pin in it, it holds the nesting there for you so that you'll have a really sharp, crisp intersection there. Like the 4 corners will be just perfect little angles. Okay, now you're going to do that again with all of these until you have 8 pairs. So again, you take these 2, flip the bottom one, make sure you have the dark side in the upper left, then put them right sides together, and you're going to pin each of these intersections. All right, after you've pinned all of those, bring it to the sewing machine, and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam along all of these. All right, I just wanted to show you how I do this when I'm sewing my pairs together. So I have them all lined up here, and they're all pinned at the intersections. I have my dark fabric on top, and I'm just getting ready to sew my 1/4 inch seam. You actually don't need to backstitch at the beginning and end. Because of what we're going to do next, it's better if you don't. You do want to start sewing right on the edge of your fabric, like you don't want to put your needle and start right here, but just don't backstitch and it should be okay. So I start sewing, and then I usually stop just right before my pin and take it out and then keep going. Also, you want to make sure that if this seam is supposed to be this way, sometimes it could like get caught and pulled the wrong way. So I just kind of lift it up and set it down to make sure both of the seams are going the way they should. Okay, and make sure your fabric stays flush the whole way down. Okay, and I don't even take it off, I just kind of chain piece all of these together. So now I'll start my next one. All right, so I've sewed together all of my strips, so now I have 8 pieces, and this is how big they are. We've got, should look like this, okay? So for the next step, we are going to be doing something kind of different with this middle seam here, and I wanted to show it to you up close. So see how this makes a little 4 square patch? You've got the dark squares here and you've got the lighter squares here. This is what we want it to look like, and then we're going to take it to the ironing board and press it down. You don't want to just like start ironing it like this, because that messed up the thing. But you want to open it, and then you take your iron on top and you just press it down. And let me show you how I made those. So here is one of my pieces, and I'm gonna take it, and because we didn't do a back stitch at the beginning and end of our thing, it makes this a little easier. I'm just going to take my fingers right here, and then I kind of pull one up and one down, and you can see that 4 patch appears. So now this one, I'm going to take my fingers and twist. I actually had to twist it the opposite way. This one went up and this one went down. And there's my little 4 patch. Okay, and this one I'm going to pull this down and then pull this up. And see, there it is. All right. Now I'm going to do that with all of my 8 pieces, bring it to my ironing board and press these down. We do it this way because that'll make it so that when we come to join this into one big block, all of those nesting seams will still match up really nicely and work really well. So go ahead and do that. Make all your little 4 patches on this middle seam and then press them. All right, so now we've got our 8 pieces that look like this, and you're going to take 2 of them, and now we're going to join these pieces together. So you can see we're making one giant block that's 4 by 4. So I've got my 2 pieces, and I'm going to bring the top one down with right sides together, and I'm going to do everything just the way I did last time. So I'm going to pin right here. My seams should be nesting, so they should be going opposite directions. You just want to kind of fuss with the fabric and slide it in until it's really nestled together. Okay, and you're gonna sew a 1/4 inch seam right along this edge. Okay, I'm gonna repeat that until I have 4 big blocks. All right, after you've joined them all into your big blocks, you're gonna take this middle seam and do the same thing that you did with the previous seams. So you can see I've twisted them and pressed them so that they have that little 4 square patch. And I'm just gonna show you one more time. So with this last one, this side I'm gonna put my finger on it to pull it up, and this side I'm gonna pull down just with that little twisting motion. Then that little 4 patch appears. All right. So we're getting really close to being done with our quilt top. What we're gonna do is just join 2 of these big blocks together to make one long row. So you wanna orient them so that a dark corner is in the top left of both of the blocks. So here, there's my dark corner, and then I've also got a dark corner over here. I don't know if you can see it, but then I'm gonna fold these right sides together. And I'm just gonna do the same thing that we've been doing over and over again. These seams should be just ready for nesting. So I'll slide it around till they lock in place and put in a pin. And then I'll do that with the next seam. And here one more time with this last seam. Okay, and then a 1/4 inch seam right down there. So after you've done that, you'll have 2 long pieces, and you're just gonna connect those 2 long rows together to complete your quilt top. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start sewing this. All right, so these are now in my 2 long strips. I've sewed them together, and then I've ironed open in that 4 patch way that we've been doing the middle seam. And now making sure that my dark corner is in the top of this bottom strip and of this top strip, I'm gonna fold these over so that it's right sides together. Now we'll just have one long seam. And again, all of those seams should be just ready for nesting. So take each seam and put a pin in it. Then you're going to sew it with a 1/4 inch seam. And because we're not going to be adding any more, you can do the little twisty thing and make all of the 4 square patches, or you can just iron the seam open. It's your choice, because since we're not connecting any more pieces, we don't have to be fussy about which way the seams are going because we don't have any more nesting to do. All right, so go ahead and do that, and then you're going to iron the whole quilt top. And you're done with the first big step, which is making your quilt top.